Dude, Flashpoint isn't the most popular subject or the most popular thing to talk about or whatever, but I am fascinated by it. It's one of my favorite things to talk about. Even though the audience isn't as receptive when I talk about these guys, I love talking about them because it's just so fascinating. They're such a prime example of how propaganda works, honestly, you know?
You know, when we look back on Hitler, Hitler went for the youth. The enemy always goes for the youth. We must take up arms and go for our youth, arms of the truth and of godly principles. But
okay, this is Gene Bailey. He is a televangelist, an extremist pastor, and apparently doesn't realize that he is the enemy. Like, he just self-defined himself as the enemy, right? He says, the enemy always goes after the youth. We must go after the youth. Seriously. He was talking to our old buddy here, Hank Kunneman. This is a pastor / televangelist, Hank Kunneman. He was talking to him about Hank's comic books, children's books that he makes, his comic book series that he produces. And this video, he's even doing a children's video for him now, fascinatingly. So anyways, I wanted to talk about Gene Bailey because he's had some fascinating stuff to say. Is that the right word? I don't know what the right word is, but disturbing, fascinating, and hilarious at the same time. Probably wraps up my channel in a nutshell. Check this out. Late May 2023. By the way, he's on Kenneth Copeland's network. This is Kenneth Copeland's thing. He's been on this TV show and owns this channel and everything. So listen to what Gene Bailey here, televangelist, had to say about the separation of church and state. Quick interjection. I won't take long. I just wanted to tell you guys, YouTube's algorithm operates off of a few factors. Watch time, whether or not you subscribe, and whether or not you like something. So if you really want to help my channel, I would appreciate it if you guys watch the video to the end. If you don't watch it to the end, just watch a little bit longer than you would have otherwise. I would appreciate that very much. All right, let's get back to the video. Late May 2023.
you see, we have the power, but the enemy does not want you to think you have the power. The left wants you to think you don't have the power. You say, oh, Gene, you're talking about religion and politics in the same talk. Yes, I am. Because you and I have been fed a lie for decades that says the church and state shouldn't be together.
Well, yeah, there's that little pesky thing in the Constitution called the Establishment Clause. Literally the first sentence in the First Amendment of the Constitution, really. Establishment Clause basically says, Congress shall make no law regarding the establishment of religion or whatever. I don't even remember the full text of it, but the idea is church and state will stay separate from each other. The guy that wrote the Constitution originally was James Madison, and I think he was like the fourth president or something like that, right? Well, Thomas Jefferson assisted. He contributed to the framing of the Constitution and the ideological backbone of it, right? So Thomas Jefferson was what, the second or he was the third president? Is that what he was? Which president was Jefferson? John Adams was number 2. Wasn't John Adams a complete scumbag? I think he was. Yeah, Thomas Jefferson was number 3. Okay, so Thomas Jefferson is president, right? And he gets a letter from Danbury Baptist Church. And this is like a conglomeration of churches. This is like a little group of them all in this little area, right? And they were in Connecticut. And Danbury Baptist Church, the conglomeration or whatever, the little group says, there's a Calvinist denomination in control of the state of Connecticut right now. Like, they are the state church, and Connecticut is passing laws on their behalf. How is this okay? Isn't this like exactly what the First Amendment said? Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof or abridging the freedom of speech or press or so on and so forth, right? So the important part is the first sentence there. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. So Danbury Baptist Church writes in to Thomas Jefferson, who's president at the time, and they say, isn't this like illegal? Like, Connecticut has a state church and they're passing laws on their behalf and stuff. Like, they are one. They are inseparable. They're the same unit, basically. And it, again, Calvinist denomination. Baptists didn't like Calvinists, and at the time. They still don't really. And Thomas Jefferson writes back, they were asking him, what did you mean when you put in Congress shall make no law? Like, what was the point of that? And Jefferson writes back, my point was to establish the separation between church and state. There shouldn't be any intermingling with these two entities. Church and state should stay completely separate, because a lot of the people that came over to America from Britain came here because they were being religiously persecuted. They believed differently from what the state church in England believed, and they were being persecuted for that fact. So they very intentionally, when framing the Constitution, set up a whole system to prevent people from being forced to worship in any specific way, prevent the government from supporting any religion over any other religion or any other thing like that. With that context in mind, that's what Jefferson said to Danbury Baptist Church. That's where separation of church and state comes from. That's where the phrase comes from those letters that he wrote to Danbury Baptist. And that is what he meant. Now, with that context in mind, continue listening to Gene Bailey here, what he had to say. So he says we should have more church in state or whatever, right?
Because you and I have been fed a lie for decades that says the church and state shouldn't be together. No. What Jefferson wrote was the state should not infect the church should infect the state.
Fascinating that that's his viewpoint on this, right? Considering the fact that it's impossible to have one without the other. If a church infects a state, then necessarily a state is infecting every other church. You think if you allow, let's say Gene Bailey, Trump cultist, takes control of the government and shoves his Christian beliefs down everybody's throats. I'm not talking Christian beliefs. I'm sorry. That's not even a fair representation. I mean evangelical, extremist QAnon beliefs is really what it is. Imagine he pushes that stuff on everybody around him. It pushes it in schools and everywhere. How do you think that's going to feel to the Catholics or the Methodists or the Muslims? The fact is, if church infects state, then state infects church. That's how it works, necessarily. That's why Congress shall make no law establishing religion or the whatever, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. That's why it also applies the other way around. Either church and state stay separate, or they don't. There is no, middle ground here. There is no one infects the other, but the other doesn't infect the one. That's nonsense. He's been pretty open about his position on what his goals are. Just listen to this. Mid-January 2023, he lays it on the line. He was advertising for this in-person event that he was holding, this Flashpoint event or whatever, and he was explaining to people what they could expect. Listen.
Our events this year are different than what you went to last year, so that's why you need to come. There are 2 nights, Thursday night and Friday night. Friday during the day, you're going to have lots of training, and I hate that when I say training because that sounds really boring, and I can't stand boring. These are not boring things you're going to go to. You're going to learn, but it's going to be fun. You're going to enjoy it. A lot of stuff happening. You say, well, what kind of training is that? What kind of stuff? These flash talks, I'm calling them flash talks, okay? What you're going to learn from this flash, how to go back to your house, wherever you live, and learn how to flip your school board so that your kids, if they're going to public school, you can start taking over the school board. And you go, well, that sounds like we're trying to take over the world. Yes, we are. I fully admit that. That's exactly what we're doing.
Kind of disturbing, right? Kind of disturbing to hear people describe things so brazenly and openly that way. Like he is ready to take over the world for Jesus at the end of a gun if need be. Like whatever it takes to, quote unquote, his word, infect the state with the church. And not just any church, but his church, his specific denomination. If you're a Christian, trust me, You should have a problem with this too. Believe me, you don't want to live in the world that Gene Bailey has in mind for Christians who are to the left of hunting the homeless for sport. Okay? You don't want to be there. I mean, this is by no means the first time the dude's gone completely off the rails. All right, listen to this. September 15th, 2022, he was talking about his goals and how he's going to get them fixed. And this is like the quintessential example of propaganda and how it works and how he uses his words in very specific ways to send a message without actually coming out and saying that message openly. So listen to how he starts his talk and then listen to how he finishes it. Check this out.
And ladies and gentlemen, if you didn't know it, you're in the middle of a war. And what we're dealing with on a daily basis are acts of war.
I mean, FYI, the people in this audience, by and large, are veterans. I mean, they intentionally set out to target this demographic of people. Fascinatingly, a poll released not too long ago that said that veterans, people who were previously in the military, are not predisposed as a demographic to right-wing extremism. They are not more likely as a group of people to be right-wing extremists. But people like Gene Bailey and other right-wing extremist groups, Patriot Front, Patriot Vanguard, and I don't know, any of the other right-wing extremists, Proud Boys and Oath Keepers, 3%ers, they intentionally set out to target veterans with propaganda, with their propaganda efforts. They set out to bring them into their organizations. Why? I think it's pretty obvious why. I mean, Gene Bailey said it at the very beginning. We are in a war, quote unquote, right? And that term has a very different meaning to the group of people to whom he's speaking right now. Keep listening.
But let me say right here, I'm not talking about going and getting your AR and go down and take care of business.
So he had to qualify what he's about to say with that. But think about what he says next. He basically is saying that's exactly what you're supposed to be doing in a minute. He just wanted to qualify it at the beginning of the talk. Keep listening.
Not what I'm talking about. However, we are in a war nonetheless. But let me bring it home really easily to you right now. You see, there's a Goliath in your life. And if there's a David on the inside of you, you're not looking at how big Goliath is.
Okay, you remember the story of David and Goliath? I'm sure most of you do if you went to church when you were little. Hell, I'm sure this is a story told in Judaism too, and probably in Muslim circles, right? Because they share the same origin stories. David and Goliath, guy took out another guy, just killed him. Like, that's the end of the story for Goliath. There was a battle, and in the end, David, murdered somebody.
You're not looking at how big Goliath is or how many people he destroyed. What you're seeing is what David said. What do I get if I kill him?
I mean, that's pretty on the nose, right? Is it obvious to anybody else now why this guy qualified this talk at the very beginning with, I'm not saying you should go get your AR and take care of business? I mean, it should be pretty clear now, right? That is exactly what he was saying. But he wanted to openly and upfront say, this isn't what I'm saying, and then say it. That's how this works. That's how propaganda works. That's how stochastic terrorism works. If you've never heard that term before, stochastic terrorism is when somebody demonizes something, an idea or a person or a group or whatever, and demonizes them and demonizes them and demonizes them until some lone nut who listens to them in their audience does something about it, gets their AR and takes care of business the way he's describing right now. That is what stochastic terrorism is. And probably the perfect example of this is when Bill O'Reilly talked about Dr. Tiller, an abortion doctor, right? Dude was demonized by Bill O'Reilly, who, by the way, was the top Fox host for years. He's demonized by Bill O'Reilly for decades. You know, he'd talk about him constantly. He'd call him Tiller the baby killer. Until one day, Dr. Tiller was at his church. Service ends. Dr. Tiller walks out of the service, and it was over. Just like that. Somebody was waiting for him in the parking lot. That's stochastic terrorism. And that's what Gene Bailey is encouraging right now. He wanted to come out in the opener and say, this is not what I stand for, so that he could then basically say, this is what I stand for. Anyway, keep listening here.
Destroy. What you're seeing is what David said. What do I get if I kill him? Now tell
I mean, it's pretty on the nose, right? It doesn't get clearer than that.
Now tell me again what I get if I take this guy out. That's bold Mike Lindell type of confidence. I'm looking for...
Wow, dude. Look at the thing on the background there. It says, if God put a Goliath in your life, he must believe there's a David inside you. If there's somebody that you don't like, that you think is doing something they shouldn't be doing, then it means that God believes in you, believes in your ability to do something psychotic with your iron rod, a.k.a. your gun, right? Your AR, as he said. Unhinged stuff, dude.
I'm looking for some warriors. The army may be looking for a few good men, but I'm looking for a few warriors in the room.
Look at these veterans here. I mean, presumably this veteran here, I'm circling with my mouse. You know, he's not revved up. He's focused. He's processing what's being said right now. He's thinking about it. He's not even clapping, is he? He's really taking it in and really considering what this dude is saying right now. That is psychotic.
But the real battle isn't here at this meeting. The real battle is when you go home and you go back to work. And you go look at your child or your grandchild that doesn't know what sex they are.
Okay, every kid knows what sex they are, to my knowledge. This is not an uncommon thing. This is completely made up. This is like a fabricated problem that he wants to blow out of proportion intentionally to freak these people out. That's the goal here. He wants to make them feel like they're persecuted. Like, oh my God, my grandchild doesn't know what sex they are. Nobody has ever contested any of this. This is nonsense, all of it.
That's when the real battle comes. There's got to be an understanding that there's something living on the inside of you that's
your mom.
Much bigger than who you are.
God, I jumped the gun. I was premature on that. I could have waited and had an even better your mom joke there. Okay, let's keep listening.
That there's something living on the inside of you that's much bigger than who you are on your own. That gives you that David kind of boldness that says, what do I get, God, if I take this guy out?
Seriously, does it get clearer than this? This is stochastic terrorism. A minute ago, he said, what do I get if I kill this guy? What do I get if I take this guy out? It's like he's setting up a system for like, what would you call like a quid pro quo, like a trade, you know? If I take this guy out, then I will go to heaven. That's kind of the thing that he's trying to set up in their heads. If I do something psychotic to these people, then I get something back for it. I'm rewarded. It's a good thing. That's what he's trying to set up in these people's heads, in these veterans' heads.
You see, you've been in an act of war for the last few years more than you've ever been before. Now, there's a lot of people out there saying Jesus is coming soon, and he is. But listen, we got a lot of work to do before Jesus comes back. Don't get me wrong, I'm ready to go on the first bus load out. However, there's other scripture that say, well, occupy until he comes.
Okay, that's fascinating right there. What he just said, will occupy until he comes. What that basically means, what he's basically trying to communicate, is one of the fundamental beliefs of Seven Mountains Dominionism, which is Jesus can't come back until Christian nationalists are in charge, because it says some verse that they've interpreted to mean this thing rather than that thing, and so on and so forth. Like, they've reinterpreted the Bible in such a way that it looks as though they have to be in control of the government. Not Baptists, not Methodists, not Catholics, but these people have to be in control of the government before Jesus will come back. If there's a Catholic in control, it's not going to work. If there's a Methodist in control, he's not coming back. Evangelical, prosperity gospel, Pentecostal type of people have to be in charge of the government before Jesus returns. That's what he means when he said that last line there.
However, there's other scripture that said, well, occupy until he comes.
This guy is so deeply fascinating to me. Like, it's just the perfect example of propaganda, of how propaganda works, of what it is and how it gets into people's heads and how it's manipulated by other people to suit their own ends. Anyway, let me know what you think about it in the comments. This guy's obviously completely terrible, but it's really fascinating to get a glimpse into how he's doing this trick, like how he's manipulating the audience, in what way he's doing it. It's really interesting to see. Horrifying, but I wouldn't worry about it too much. We have the numbers by far. This is a small extremist group that's far bigger than it should be. You know, maybe 20-30% of the country would agree with this guy. That's too many. But that's not 50%. So if you're feeling like kind of down after watching this, don't. I mean, it's mostly valuable to pick apart so that anybody who might be falling down this rabbit hole can see this for what it is. Anyway, let me know what you think about it in the comments. This guy is absolutely fascinating to me.